What would you say makes a good panel?
Okay, for me, I think it's really important if you can use the panel to showcase their best points and bring them forward in a way that is helpful to people. And I really hope that out of that last panel, there were pointers that you could take away, as I mentioned, but also that you really got a sense of what they were doing in their organizations to make a just transition happen. So I think it's really sticking to the topic. It's about having a discussion that is useful to the audience. The audience are the most important people in the room, and having them take away something that they can really use. That's a key panel thing for me. Thank you for asking. Hadn't thought about that. Really appreciate that. We do have another panel coming up. So, for example, yesterday, I did listen to a really interesting panel about government transition. And it's when you take away a little nugget of information that you think is really good. And one of the panelists said the most amazing thing. She said, there's no such thing as a win-win situation, because if somebody's talking about a win-win situation, they are just closing their ears off to the person that's losing, essentially, because there's no such thing. In any solution, there is always compromise, and compromises have to be made. So even if you come away from a discussion with one thing, and I'd like you to think about that now, perhaps reflect on the fringe sessions you had yesterday afternoon, and think about one key takeaway. I'm sure you've all got notes, so those notes, use them to think about what you're going to change and do. Okay.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that.
Sorry, that was me just having...
Your own little solo fringe session right here on stage.
I know, my own solo fringe, inspiration by Shonali. Okay, we'll move on to the next panel. One of the biggest challenges in the B Corp movement is asking how we fundamentally change the economic systems that drive our businesses and our societies.
The next panel consists of 3 incredible change makers who have worked at the heart of the system in government, law, and business, and who are now finding new ways to influence change.
So, their session is called From Insiders to Activists, Navigating Systems for a Better Economy.
Please join me in welcoming to the stage our fabulous panelists and this session's moderator, Executive Director of B-Lab UK, Chris Turner.
Thank you.
Morning, everybody. Oh, yes. Yeah. I see what they mean. Yeah. Oh, God. This is a really exciting panel. I'm really excited about this and about the 24 minutes and 32 seconds that we're going to have to explore what systems change entails and some of the levers for affecting systems. Now, when I was thinking about this panel and thinking about having a conversation on this main stage about systems change, I think the big question for me was how to bring together a panel which can make some of these topics and these questions as sort of immediate, as accessible, as dynamic as some of the very kind of real and tangible conversations we've heard on this stage over yesterday and this morning. No one on this panel can talk to you about how they made their socks, or show you something that is a kind of tangible product of their work. And so what I thought would be a really interesting way of bringing this to life is bringing together an amazing panel of people who have been through a journey of working at the very heart of the system that we are trying to change, whether that is in business, in finance, in government, and then a transition, a moment of change, a moment of changing perspectives and changing their own vantage point to be trying to influence those systems from outside. And so I thought it'd be really interesting to kind of hear the stories of those transitions, the experiences and changing perspectives, and then to just use that experience to reflect a little bit on the levers for change from both within systems, institutions, organizations, and from outside. So that's the idea behind this conversation. I think it'll be really interesting. Amazing lineup, as I say. We've got I should say a big thanks to Amy, who has stepped in at the last minute. Farhana was going to join us, and she unfortunately had to, she was called away, so we sent her our best. But Amy, thank you for joining us. So I won't do the intros. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. We've got Amy, Chris, and Anu. And what I'm going to start off with is just asking each of you to tell us that story of that transition. Tell us a bit about kind of the beast, working within the beast of the system, the institutions, the organizations, and then that transition to outside. So I'm going to start with you, Amy, at the end there, and we'll work our way down. Amy, tell us about your systems journey, if you like.
Thanks, Chris, and apologies to some of you in the audience because you probably know this story already. So my journey pretty much started probably about 40 years ago, actually. My mother spent just shy of 45 years working for a charity that provided equine therapy for children and adults with disabilities. It's called Riding for the Disabled. Princess Anne set it up. It's very well known. That was her passion. She didn't get paid for it, but she spent 45 years in a life of service. So as a child, I was raised very much with that knowledge that there are things that you can do that fulfill you, that give you purpose and meaning that aren't necessarily paid. So psychologically, as a young child, when you're seeing your mother do that, and she's ignited with that sense of passion and mission and purpose, it's really quite compelling, I think, when you're young. So by the time I was sort of 12, 13, I announced to my parents, none of us had ever been to university. I was the first to go to university. I'm a state school grad. I'm going to university, and I'm going to change the world. I was an environmentalist by then. I'd started to see, we were being taught in school around acid rain, the changing climate. So I was very much, this is what I'm going to do. So I went to university to study climate and soil science. I am that geek, and came out, went and did a master's, thinking, great, excellent, 2 degrees, straight up into the world of kind of business, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get inside the system and help the system understand how it can become a better force, what we would now say is, a force for good. And no doors opened, because I was a woman with 2 science degrees, in climate, soil science, and environmental policy and law. And if you remember, if anyone's got kids and you go on a beach and they see one of those little translucent jellyfish and they start poking it, kind of going, "Mummy, Mummy, what's this?" It's pretty much what I got from every single financial institution in the City of London. It was like, what the hell is it? And what do we do with it? It just doesn't make sense. We're not sure where to put it. And I had over probably about 180 letters that went out, and nobody would interview me. I couldn't even get in the door. And that's when I started thinking, this is really interesting, because there's a judgment that's being made here on me without actually understanding anything about me, my capabilities, my experiences, what I can do. So I think, very early on in my career, I sort of made the decision, okay, well, if the front door's open, somebody will have left the back door ajar, or there will be a window. I've just got to find it. So I went into consultancy, sustainability consultancy, and I've spent 30 years now in sustainability. And very quickly, within that sort of early stage of my career, so within year 2, I was, with the consultancy I was at, was offered the opportunity to go to Barclays Bank and sit within their environmental risk management unit that still exists, and it was effectively a unit that looks at all of their commercial lending decisions for environmental risk. So I kind of come up at Barclays and I'm like, hello boys, back again. Spent a really happy amount of time actually in a male team, but looking at environmental risk and then kind of going, ooh, this is actually where it's happening. This is what I want to do. Long story short, spent 9 years in consultancy with then Ernst & Young and then latterly with PwC before I made the decision to go in-house, because I thought this is where now I need to go into an organization and affect change now. I've got the learning, I've got the skills, now I know how to do it. And luckily for me, at the time I made that decision, Microsoft were looking for 3 heads of sustainability, and this was just after they were nearly split up by the Department of Justice. So I spent a very happy 4 years at Microsoft and then went across to Bank of America to do the same, head up sustainability. And it was actually when I was at Bank of America that I sat there, and after about 3 years, and this was during 2008-2009 crisis, that I thought, hang on, wait a minute, there's a couple of things here that really aren't working. One, for the most, apparently, educated industry and the best paid industry on the planet, nobody understands risk. This is fascinating. And secondly, for an industry that purports to support wealth holders grow their wealth, they're exposing these individuals, these institutions, to extreme levels of risk, but also they're not listening to them. They've intermediated wealth, and as a result, they've stripped all the well-being and the values out of it. So these incredible people who may have set up a B Corp and exited it, not back then, but set up a mission-driven business, for example, and exited it, there's nowhere they can go to then reinvest that money in those types of industries and businesses that they're passionate about. And that's where the idea for Tribe really came from. And I moved sideways into impact investing and spent about 3 years heading up a private client team, specifically working on social investment and philanthropy. And then thought, okay, I understand the psychology of wealth now. Now is the time to hopefully create something that shows what's possible when you want to create a destination for wealth holders who really do care, when you want to create a destination that fundamentally interrogates what wealth actually is and what its purpose is, and you want to move as much as you can the industry to recognizing what truly risk-adjusted investment looks like and what total returns need to look like as well. And that's pretty much the story. It was a degree of, I think, kind of angry, middle-aged blonde woman going, I've had enough. But also that very young child in me saying, I want to change the world. I need to find my space.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. Well, brilliant start. Yeah, fantastic. An amazing story. Definitely worth hearing twice for anybody who'd heard it already. And of course, exploring the role of investment and finance in this whole system that we're talking about, which really is kind of a fabric which underpins everything. Chris, I'm going to move on to you. Don't start with what your parents did, because we don't have time to go for that. So maybe a quicker summary, but bringing government into the picture, obviously such a prominent part of the system.
Thanks, Chris. So I was a Conservative MP for 14 years, so you're probably wondering, what am I doing here? Actually, 5 years ago, I had the privilege of serving in Cabinet in Theresa May's government when I was Energy and Clean Growth Minister. It was that time when her Brexit deal had failed, the government was sort of pretty much on the way out, and we were looking for opportunities to sort of cement a legacy for the Prime Minister, and I just happened to be in the right place at the right time. I hadn't focused as much on sustainability. I'm Johnny-come-lately, if I'm honest with you, when it comes to looking at net zero. But we had this thing called net zero that had been proposed. Farhana Yamin helped create it. Sorry she's not here, but that narrative journey is a fascinating one. The Committee on Climate Change had recommended that the UK government also sign net zero into law in order to be compatible in the long term with the Paris Agreement. And I had this moment in time where we were able to get it across the line, to secure cross-party support, to secure cross-NGO support, so that the UK became the first G7 country to commit to net zero into law. What I didn't know then was as a result of COP26, which I also helped secure as Energy Minister, 93% of global GDP would sign up eventually to a net zero target. This sort of domino effect that happened as the result of the UK going first. And ever since then, I've been convinced that net zero is not just absolutely a climate imperative, it is also an economic opportunity to redefine how we sell goods, how we do business. You all know this, that's why you belong to B Corp. But it set me then on a journey. I was then asked by the UK government to lead a review of net zero. Everyone thought, well, maybe the guy's going to come along and sort of revise the targets. Actually, I produced a report, Mission Zero, that was the largest engagement exercise on net zero in the UK ever conducted, that again set out why net zero is the economic opportunity of our generation. Personally, however, that sort of meant that I had my own journey, which was that I had to defend net zero to the hilt. Already during the Conservative Leadership Contest in 2022, I organised a net zero pledge that I held all candidates to. I got Alex Sharma to host a big hustings. We got the final 2 candidates to commit to net zero. But when Rishi Sunak began to row back on net zero in the summer of 2022, I knew that I personally was going to have to take a stand. I'd been at the heart of government. But I realized that if I was going to be serious about the commitments that I'd made and to retain my integrity, I was going to have to walk out the door. So in January earlier this year, when the government then finally came forward with something that wasn't even in the manifesto, net zero was on the front page of the Conservative manifesto, bringing in a bill to legislate for new oil and gas licenses was not there. I decided to take the decision to resign the Conservative whip, but also to resign from Parliament. Already there had been a by-election where Rishi Sunak thought that it was a great idea if we could replicate this by-election strategy around ULEZ and then sort of, show that somehow we're going to do a more proportionate version of net zero. He was going to win votes. I saw this as environmentally catastrophic, but also electorally a disaster. And I was proved right at the general election. Hordes of people who care about the climate, 77% of voters, decided to turn their back on the Conservatives because of this rowback. And in the end, when it comes to taking decisions on climate, I decided that I'd worked in a system to help change it, but actually there was a point where I had to now leave that system if I was going to have a greater impact.
Brilliant. Thank you. Great. Yeah. Great to hear your story, Chris. We'll dive in a little bit more. I'm sure we were all really pleased to see you take that stand when that legislation on oil and gas licenses was revealed. Anu, I'm going to come to you for the final story. I say to tee us up, we're halfway through our time already, but to tee us up and your experience of leading businesses, within a massive multinational running businesses, and now you're obviously sitting outside that system of big kind of corporate enterprise and thinking about influencing it from outside. Tell us a little bit about that ride.
The transition.
The transition,
well,
yes.
Well, the trigger is actually redundancy, because I was the CEO of Pukka till November, and then what's moved me out quite physically, tangibly, is redundancy, because Pukka was part of Unilever, where it was a speedboat that was kept to influence Unilever from within by staying a B Corp, by staying independent. But when the organization then sold the tea business, and with that Pukka, the new owners, private equity, didn't want to continue with Pukka as a separate entity, but actually move it as part of a brand within a portfolio. That did mean redundancy for the person who was leading, and in fact, large part of the old Pukka organization. So that's the trigger, but that's after a career of working with Unilever, working at Ben & Jerry's. So I have a lot of business experience, but when you're in the business, when you're running business, your nose is on the ground, and you're basically doing the day-to-day running of the organization. You don't really have time to sit back and think about the system as such. You're in the system. So this has now given me the opportunity to really step back, to really look, and I've been learning tons of stuff, finance, aligned finance. How do we kind of really ensure that what are these B Corps? What are these businesses that I'm part of heading towards? What are we swimming in? Are we swimming upstream? Are we swimming into the mouth of a wide open shark? So all of that you don't think of when you're in the system as such, when you're running it. But now I can sit back and really think about, what are we doing? Is it really good that we've got so many more B Corps coming into the system? Are we enabling these B Corps to really be able to thrive in a system in which capital might not be aligned, in which governance might not be suited to our kind of businesses? So that's the kind of stuff that I'm working on.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anu. Brilliant to hear Anu's story as well. So I really want to leave a couple of minutes at the end, because this iPad apparently is going to be full of questions from the audience. So I want to pick out one or two of those at the end. Before I do, I want to run back down with one question I think we'll have time for, but I think it's going to be a really interesting one. I think one of the most interesting questions that B Corps wrestle with, whether they think about this kind of consciously or whether it just kind of shows up in how they think about B Corp and the movement and being here, is a sort of reflection on whether or not B Corps and the B Corp movement is part of the system and trying to change it from within, or whether we're kind of trying to create an alternative system and we're trying to sort of move people over to something else, or to sort of be more activists from the outside. So what I'd love to hear from each of you, following on from your reflections of being, forgive me, spat out by the system, should B Corps think of themselves as agents of change within this kind of or all kind of sort of encompassing economic system? Or should B Corps think of themselves as something that is quite separate and trying to sort of either shift to something new or be activist agents of change from outside the system? Which do you think is a more effective way of thinking about the identity of B Corp as a movement and affecting kind of change through the levers from either within or without? What do you think, Annie?
I've changed my perspective on this. So, very much when I was with Ben & Jerry's in particular, I really thought of business as a force for good and being iconic in being able to be a role model for change. And I truly believed in that. And I'm sitting in a bunch of B Corps and kind of saying, well, I think we are possibly just a bunch of beach cleaners, early morning voluntary beach cleaners. And that's great. I mean, we feel very righteous about that. But beach cleaners, as we know, aren't really going to change the system, right? So I'm in this point of changing my perspective and saying that's just not enough. It's great that we voluntarily put ourselves up on a pedestal and our role models, but we've got to really understand what's stopping us from becoming mainstream. And that will require a lot more collaboration with other organizations, a lot more collaboration with other organizations that also want to change the system. So I don't believe we should go at it uniquely and alone. We do have one unique point. And the one unique point is that we've got multiple cases of businesses that can do work alternatively. But to really change the system, we've got to work with many other experts, many other change people who understand system change better than individual businesses do.
Brilliant.
I think it's about recognizing where we are in the transition. As I mentioned, 93% GDP committed to net zero. Those are just words on a page. Obviously, as B Corps, you've now got to live up and deliver on the commitments you've made. So demonstrating that we are all together actually delivering change is really important. But then we are now in this next phase about how do you scale up, how do we get that message out to other companies that won't necessarily join B Corp, are concerned about the transition, are potentially fodder for political opponents to try and destabilize the transition. This is the moment where we need to get out and try and help support those companies and help them on their own journey. So I think this is the proselytizing moment for B Corp, where you have your membership, you are a movement, understanding where are the campaigns you can take forwards to successfully deliver change across all businesses in the UK or other countries. I mean, 80% of all businesses are SMEs. It's those companies that are going to find the transition hard, and that's where you should focus your attention.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris.
And Chris. And Chris, we've spoken at length about this. None of us are outside the system. We're all in the system. There are just degrees of separation within the system, I think. Different areas, kind of concentric circles of influence, for example. So I think, we have to recognize that we're all in the system, for a start, and also recognize that the system's not broken. Now, that might be really inconvenient for you to accept, but the system's not broken. It's serving precisely the purpose it was built for. The operating code was infused by a series of values at the time that people felt were right. They were reflective. They were context-based in terms of what people felt was important as the system has grown. Those values have resulted in source code that is now wrong. So we have to change the source code, but we have to be willing to accept that the system's not broken. It just needs to be reimagined. And as a result, there's a huge amount of opportunity for us all to do this. And I want to pick up on something actually that Patrick said earlier. If you think about the climate crisis, you think about rising levels of inequality, you think about geopolitical instability, you think about all of the egregious forms of inequality that we have out there, are they really the problems, or are they the symptoms of the problem? And is the real problem that we're facing now a crisis of confidence and faith as a species and as individuals? And therefore, if we want to change the system, we have to look very long and hard at ourselves, the values we have, and how many times on a daily basis we compromise our values in the pursuit of convenience in order to do what we need to do. That's a big, big question, I think. But in order to help other people do that, we have to make them feel safe. We have to make them feel nurtured. We have to make them feel supported. And the one thing that the B Corp movement cannot become is so insular that it doesn't allow others in. We have to create sanctuaries for ourselves. Everyone in this room, this is a massive sanctuary for us. But we have to be willing to open those sanctuaries, those places and those spaces where others can come and feel nurtured and supported and joyous in the pursuit of them reconnecting with their own value set and then driving the change we need them to in the industries that they're in.
Brilliant. Yeah. Thank you. Brilliant. Fantastic to hear that from you all, and some really clear themes that are playing out through what we heard on this stage yesterday and today in terms of bringing people with us, that kind of scale, that we need to achieve, but also the humanity that's at the heart of what we're talking about here and the sort of very personal experience that it is for lots of people. We've got 2 minutes left, and so I'm going to be able to squeeze in one question, which is scoring highest on actually it's the standout winner of the questions being submitted online from Charlotte. So 30 seconds each. If we have 5 years to really make shifts on the climate crisis and the climate challenge, what do you each think is the most vital systemic change that we need to make? I'm going to come to you first, Chris, because I feel like you've probably been noodling on this for quite some time.
I mean, this is actually something I'm really focusing my attention on. I've set up something called the Climate Action Coalition to focus on policy to try to deliver on the halving of emissions by 2030. John Kerry launched it at London Climate Action Week, and we're trying to look at how we can convene, not just UK companies, but internationally, this idea about how do we create standardization in regulation, in policy frameworks, but also how do we look at the best practice and end best practice, scale it up across the globe. If you look at buildings, why have we got several different buildings codes? How can we ensure we'll make the transition cheaper if we can ensure that everyone is facing in the same direction?
Great. So kind of standardization and the underpinnings that are helping us measure the change that we're making. Very clear. Great. Amy, one thing.
One thing. Part A, Part B, because it is the same thing. It's one. So one, we need a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So for those of you who don't know about it, please Google it. We need a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, and as part of that, we need to take the fossil fuel industry and hard-to-abate industries back into public ownership to stimulate the transition, and then make the decision whether or not we put them back into effectively, the marketplace for trading.
Okay, so a real catalyst to transition. Okay, interesting. Annie, what's your one thing?
I'll take a micro approach, so much more actionable within B Corps, because I do agree with both these. So I think they'll be the big changes. But what's in our agency, what's in our hands to also be able to influence this change is really to work within our industry as coalitions. I think you'll hear about the Beauty Coalition after this, and I think those will be some things that are tangible for the B Corps to work. It might not be the one thing that gets us in 5 years, but that's something that's within our agency to be able to really influence as well.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you, Anu. I love the fact that in those final points, you've all absolutely hit on why you're sitting on this panel. Chris, you're talking about the role of government and regulation and the role it can play in shifting the system. Amy, you're talking about ultimately the role of catalytic kind of financial interventions. And Anu, you're talking about the incredibly important role that business need to play in that shift. So nailing the brief. A huge thank you to the panel. Thanks very much.
Oh my goodness me. Thank you so much, Amy, Chris, Anuradha, and Chris. That was incredible. I had so many I love the system is not broken, we just need to change the code. That was one of my favorite.
Fantastic message.